My name is Gifty Etia, and I'm a CSPC Programs volunteer here. We are about to start our panel titled Building Institutional Capacity to Make Science Inclusive, Equitable, and Accessible for All Canadians, organized by the Natural Resources Canada and Canada Food Inspection Agency. This year, CSPC provides simultaneous and closed captions for all panels in both French and English. Please scan the QR code on your table to download the app and access subtitles in your preferred language. We do have the conference mobile app as well. Feel free to download the CSPC 2025 app available in the App Store or on Google Play. Please also remember to tweet about your favorite events and moments in the program using @SciencePolicy and CSPC 2025. Finally, please don't forget to fill the evaluation and survey for each session in the program's app using the session number shown on your screen. Your feedback helps us improve the conference for the following years. Enjoy the panel, and thank you very much for being here.
So thank you, Gifty, and good morning to you, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Gifty, I was going to ask if we should tweet this as our favorite event. Okay, so please don't forget, the number is 277. Don't mind me. Okay, so it's a joy to have you here, and you are all welcome. Now, to start with, I'm going to ask you to do something, but you have to trust me. Like, you really have to trust me. I can assure you, you are fine. So by trusting me, it means that you have to close your eyes. Everything is fine in the room. Good. I can see you trust me. I can see you trust me. Okay. And with your eyes closed, I want you to point with your right hand to where true north is. Point to the northern side, northern Canada, true north. Like, just show so that we see where your hand is. Okay, yeah, good. Beautiful. And don't remove your hand. No, keep your hand there and quietly open your eyes. I want us to see where our hands are together. Oh, what happened? Okay, I think my panelists probably got it correct. So this is something that happens to us when we move around the staircase. Oh, you can put your hands down, thank you. When we move around the staircase and we turn around and several things happen, we kind of lose our sense of orientation. And there is always a need to have what will keep us to true north. That is a compass. Why am I telling this story? That is what the science-based department and agencies have done. We have created a guide that will help us make science inclusive so that we are sure that we can have a target, we have measures to see our progress, and to be able to know that we are meeting our goal. So thank you all for joining us. I wanted to let you have a fair idea where we are going to. Okay, so my name is Ifa Kwabena Antwi. I'm a research scientist, and I'm going to be your moderator for this session. So don't mind me if I'm not able to meet your expectation, but I think I can drive us to where we want to be. So we meet today when our country and the world as a whole is rapidly evolving, and the science that we do, the methodology, the purpose, the reach of it, you can see that there is a need for us to do something about it. And here in Canada, we recognize that science should be inclusive, it should be equitable, it should be accessible, and in fact, it should meet the need of the people who live on this beautiful country of ours. So in responding to the call to action on anti-racism, equity, and inclusion by the clerk of the Privy Council, the science-based departments and agencies have actually come together to form the Interdepartmental Inclusive Science Initiative. And the initiative has successfully, and this initiative was formed in 2004. After the formation, we have been able to develop and share best practices on inclusive science across the science-based department and agencies. And having done that, we came out with a guideline and promoted this guideline through a national dialogue. The national dialogue was in June, and in fact, there was full commitment. And when I say full commitment, we had in person about 43 assistant deputy ministers and vice president. We have 3 deputy ministers, and I'm happy to say that our panelists here were all there, and they have been instrumental part of the development, the conception, and where we are today. So having done that, we thought it wise to share with you what the SBDAs have done, the science-based department have done, to the broader science policy community, for you to know what the government of Canada is doing to make sure that science that we do in this country is accessible, it is available, it is useful for all who live in Canada. So the guideline, just a quick overview of the guideline. We have 4 key pillars of the guidelines. And the first one is inclusive science activity design. And here we look at integrating diverse perspective from different racial group in the country. And then we have the inclusive science activity practice. So with the practice, that is where we consciously, that is intentionally ensure that the science team, the science or regulatory research science team that we have is one that is representative and can meet the goal of what we want to do. Then the third pillar is the inclusive science reporting and knowledge mobilization. So you may notice that the science that we do currently, I'm a scientist myself, from Natural Resources Canada, Canadian Forest Service. And to be honest with you, my aim is to get into a high impact factor journal. But the thing is, how many Canadians subscribe to the high impact factor journal that I publish my work in? And if the science we do is to benefit Canadians, then why have we put it beyond their reach? So what we are doing in the SBDAs, what the SBDAs have done is to make sure that the science we have done, the scientific innovation, the solutions are available, they are accessible, they are useful for everyone living in Canada. And the fourth pillar has got to do with guideline that is unique to weaving Indigenous knowledge system with science design. And here we look at the reporting, we look at the knowledge mobilization, we look at the, the practice, when it comes to weaving Indigenous methodologies in the science that we do. So today, we're going to actually have the opportunity to discuss what we have in the guidelines. And again, I want to say welcome and thank you for choosing our panel. I don't want to say and not the other one, but thank you for choosing our panel. Yeah, I want to stop at that. And I would like to introduce our esteemed panelists today. We have Nancy Hamzawi, and I asked permission to call Nancy. Nancy. Yeah, and Nancy is the president of Public Health Agency of Canada. And then we have, I have to say that Nancy has been very instrumental. It's like a champion for this particular work. We have Glenn Hargrove. Glenn is the Assistant Deputy Minister, Canadian Forest Service, Natural Resources Canada, and Glenn is a ADM champion for this particular work. We also have David Nanang. David is a, thank you, David. Yeah, David is a Vice President of Science in Canadian Food Inspection Agency, and David is a co-chair. So you see the brain behind this work, these two gentlemen. For some reason, their unity has become a reason why we are here. And I can say that. Okay. Then we have Brenda Dogbe. Brenda used to be my boss. Brenda is now Director General, Chief Equity Inclusion Officer with the Treasury Board of Canada Secretariat. And I want to also acknowledge and recognize one of our champions, in fact, not one, Dr. Harpreet Kocha, Deputy Minister, a champion for Deputy Minister Science and Technology Community, and then our own Deputy Minister, Natural Resource Canada, Deputy Minister Michael van der Graaf, and then our Associate Deputy Minister who wanted to be here. You can see that in there is you have his face on the panel, but unfortunately, something needed his attention unexpected. So thank you all. Please feel free to join the discussion during the Q&A time. And I want to say that if you want to read further about our panelists, you can go to the section page for their bios, and I'm sure you would really like it. So you can take note of anything that you think is of noteworthy during the Q&A time. You can share your questions with that and join the discussion. And then also there will be online poll. That's another way we want to engage you, to make you part of the conversation. So the online poll, you'll be able to engage and share your perspective on what the SBDAs have done. So now I will stop talking and start where, take us to where we want to be. So we will start with a mini talk, and welcome. Then thank you very much for all your guidance, your support. I get to say it in public now. We wouldn't be here without you. And I want you to know that on behalf of the working group members and all the SBDs, we are very proud of you for your, the boldness, the leadership you have expressed on this particular work. So we will start with a mini talk, and in this case, what actually motivated, what is the motivation behind this whole inclusive science guideline that we have? And I want to start with Nancy. When I start with Nancy, then we will move to Glenn and David and Brenda. I would want you to approach the same thing from a different angle. So Nancy, what is the motivation? Like, looking at it, what is the motivation of the science-based department to actually co-develop? And I like the word co-develop here. Came together to develop the inclusive science guideline. And then in your view, how do you see these guidelines being able to help like scientific productivity, inclusive innovation, and also helping to strengthen Canada's competitiveness around the globe in a time like this? Please, over to you.
Thank you very much. Un grand merci. C'est vraiment un plaisir d'être ici parmi vous. I don't see a lot of people with simultaneous translation equipment, so I will continue in English, but please do feel free to demander les questions dans la langue de votre préférence. And I also wanted to just take a moment. I know we have a certain time limit, but I do wanted to mention that I am thrilled to be here this morning, and I couldn't imagine not being here on this panel today, but this is a transparency moment, full transparency moment. I also have a conflict during this session, so I will need to leave around 11 o'clock, and I wanted to apologize in advance for that and to introduce my wonderful colleague, Timna Gorber, who will replace me on the stage, so just to be transparent about that. But back to your question in the mini talk, because I think I have 2 minutes and 42 seconds. So now, first off, I think the underlying principle really is that you can't do science in Canada unless it reflects the diversity of Canada. And so by definition, we need to co-develop as we chart our way forward across Canada, across the federal public service, and our individual organizations. And so a commitment, in terms of what a commitment to inclusive science means, it means transforming how we do science. It means rethinking who we serve, and how we deliver impact, and what does impact mean. All that in alignment with our commitments to equity, sustainability, and innovation, which I know there's been a lot of discussion around already in the conference. So as we look at it from an organizational perspective and our values and culture, it means supporting who does this work within our organizations, and by building a diverse and inclusive scientific workforce. Within the agency, we have so much work that is foundational within our organization, and very much focused on implementing against that work. So things like our science strategy, a very clear vision towards 2030 with equity fully prominent as a key priority and principle guiding us on the way forward. I know I have 1 minute, 2 seconds. Our anti-racism in science framework, which we're also very proud of, and our sex and gender-based policy, gender-based analysis plus policy. But fundamentally, we develop better science when we develop it together. And so that's what drove us forward in terms of this work.
Thank you. We develop our science when we develop it together. Thank you. Yeah, so then, Glenn, please.
Oh, can you hear me? Okay,
Yes,
great. Hi, everybody. It's great to be here. First of all, I'll just say that this as I look out at the room, this kind of reminds me of Canada. It's a diverse, friendly crowd, somewhat sparsely populated over a very vast area. So, yeah, coast to coast to coast. So, for me, I think there are a couple of things. One, I mean, Nancy really covered the aspect well, which is basically, when we have an inclusive approach to science, we do better science and get better outcomes. I think there's also an equity aspect to it too, where like other areas of society, equity-deserving groups have faced barriers throughout the years in terms of participation and fully contributing. And so this is a way to remove some of those barriers and help to support everyone to do their best work and contribute to the fullest. And there was also the clerk's call to action on anti-racism, equity, and inclusion, and sort of nothing focuses the mind like the boss saying there's a call to action here. So this also delivers on those objectives in the scientific context. And so I think having an approach where we have 17 science-based departments and agencies all working together on this, it's sort of an inclusive approach to inclusive science as well. And working together, and I think that's really helped us to have some really good outcomes with these guidelines, and helps to support our scientists and our scientific enterprise. I mean, there are people who want to work in this way, but don't always know how to go about it. And I think this is a way of providing that leadership and that support to our science teams to do their research in the best, most inclusive possible way.
Thank you very much. So David, please.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Bon matin tout le monde. Je pense que c'est le matin partout au pays. And Glenn has already showed how this represents Canada very well. So my response is going to go back fundamentally to the question of what is the role of government science? Because we're trying to do inclusive science, but what is the role of government science? And I think that there is still foundational science being done in the government, but the most important aspect of government science is how science is used to develop policy, and how that policy affects Canadians, and how that policy or the policies that are developed from science can be useful for Canadians. And so when we look at science in this context, we are thinking about how science is done within the federal government, but also how that science impacts on Canadians. So I'll come back to that in a minute. And if you actually do science that excludes parts of the country, then that is not good science, which means your policies are going to be biased. Your policies are not going to reflect the communities that they are going to impact on. And so whilst this is a way of working within the federal government to ensure that how science is done is inclusive, it is even more important to the Canadian public in terms of how the policies that result from the science are actually equitable, are actually inclusive, and actually beneficial to all Canadians. So I'm a trained forester, so I'm a plant person. But when I usually speak and I give examples, I give the examples of the elephant, which is an animal. So I've given up on elephants these days. So I like to talk about plants so my example today is about the baobab tree. So Adansonia digitata, that's the botanical name. So this tree is found mostly in the African savanna. Very large tree, it can live up to 1,000 years. It's very drought hardy. It can survive without rain for 5 years. It can grow up to 5 meters diameter. So that just tells you how big it is. So there is an African proverb that no one person can wrap their hands around a baobab tree. And the essence of this proverb is to say that you cannot actually go ahead with only one perspective. So if I put my hands around the baobab tree, if it's 5 meters in diameter, I'm not going to go anywhere. It means you need other people holding hands with you so that you can all wrap your hands around the baobab tree. But it speaks to, and so it says that knowledge is like the baobab tree. Nobody, one person can wrap their hands around it. But that's what inclusivity is all about. It is about us having the ability to work together so that all the different perspectives of the issue are actually looked at. And so when I look at the guidelines that we have right now, that is the actual intent. The intent is to say, we need to have indigenous knowledge braided into it. We need to have diversity views as part of how science is done. In addition to saying that the people that design the science, the samples that are collected, how we practice the science, how we report the science, all of that have to be inclusive. And these are the pillars of the inclusive science guidelines that we have right now. And so that's my initial kind of overview of where I think this is really going. And I think that it took a lot of effort from all our colleagues in all the science-based departments and agencies in the country to get us to where we are today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, David. And so when David says that it took the effort of all the science-based department and agencies, actually we are 17 in number, and so you can imagine that we have everyone on board. So now, Brenda, I want you to approach it from a different perspective. Why the need for inclusive science? And the reason I do this is from where you said, why the need for inclusive science? And looking at it, what is like the future perspective? Please, over to you.
Sounds good. I think you can hear me. So I will start, I'll borrow a leaf from what David had said and maybe speak about the seed that has become the baobab tree that you see today. I'm trying to carry the analogy as far as I can. And maybe in order to speak about where it is that we want to go, I think it's important to understand where we're coming from. And as I speak also, I want to take the opportunity to really acknowledge that small seed, mustard seed that was sown by Dr. Antwi is really, it has blossomed into the work that we see today. And it's just, it's a testament to what intentionality and collaboration can achieve in terms of both collaborative work, co-developed work, but also really having the right set of champions who help you move an initiative forward. So Dr. Antwi and I worked together at NRCan. I don't know about this whole I was his boss business, but we worked together at NRCan. At the time, I was the DG of the Office of Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Accessibility. And my predecessor, Trudy Samuel, had a research collaboration with Dr. Antwi with the idea of removing barriers. And at the heart of these guidelines is research excellence. It's really about advancing research excellence. And you cannot have research excellence that is not inclusive, because you will be missing a whole part of the population. And to David's point, we cannot drive outcomes for Canadians if we're not representing the Canadians, both in the subject matter, but also the people themselves who are doing the research. And so it really started from almost like the lab perspective. There's a lot of great research that is being done within NRCan. And the idea was that how do we remove barriers for scientists so they could be their best selves and produce the best work for Canadians? And that work slowly blossomed with, at the time, D.M. Hannaford, who eventually became the clerk, really being open to it. I remember sitting in his office with Glenn and Effa and having just a really candid conversation. And he was so supportive of galvanizing leadership to help us move forward. As you know, Dr. Kocher has been a really strong advocate for anti-racism in science, and so leveraging that DM Committee on Science and Technology to advance that broader context that allowed for the initiative to start. And then we had a few conversations internally to the department, bringing in science leaders from across, and then I left. But what's amazing is that in my leaving, EFA connected with quite a number of folks, and it's been gathering a lot of momentum so that it's now the 17 department work that you see today. And where we see it going, so I have to clarify that my role is internal to the central agency. So I'm Chief Equity and Inclusion Officer for the central agency, so Treasury Board, Privy Council Office, and Finance, but from an internal perspective, so not system-wide. So I am not the self-ID guy. I'm not the EDI for the whole system. But I think as we've seen from our current clerk and our current government, our priorities are very much economic focused. They're focused on us having an astute focus, simplifying how we work, and then accountability, and really building on the clerk's call to action. And there's no way that we do that without advancing inclusive science. And as we continue to invest in a science enterprise that's representative, that becomes our superpower. That becomes what makes us competitive. That becomes what sets Canada apart at a time when we could see globally EDI, the tides of EDI are shifting. We are very values-based. We're small but mighty, and we're leveraging those collaborations across the globe. And so an inclusive research enterprise becomes our competitive advantage, and it becomes something that's really critical at a time when this is what we need to build Canada both internally and internationally. So I'll stop there.
Thank you so much. So now, ladies and gentlemen, I just want you to put your hand together for our panelists for the amazing work that they have done. Let's do it better, a little better. I mean, a little louder. Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. And I think David abandoned the elephant and I took the elephant. So there is a proverb that says that if the antelope has the backing of the lion, it can confront the elephant. So, my proverb is because we were able to confront the elephant because we had the backing of the lions here. And I want to say a big thank you so much. Sorry, I'm not getting emotional, even if you hear it. Yeah, Glenn will ask me, what do you need? David will say, make sure it is evidence-based. Brenda will say, let us go further. We can't stop here. And Nancy, when she first saw this work, she's like, I like this work. I want to support this. And she's living there. So I want you to know that we are where we are because of these amazing people. Thank you very much. Okay, now I'm not going to be emotional again. So it's a follow-up, and I hear we're looking at the initiative like this has to be sustainable. And then we also, with this, we're looking at organizational culture. So how do we embed these guidelines into the organizational culture, so your organizational culture, and then also how do we make sure that we are sustaining our effort? And here, there is a need for interdepartmental collaboration in sustaining our effort. And also, we are going to meet challenges along the way. How do we overcome those challenges with implementation? Yes. So I would want to actually, this time I want to start with Glenn, and then I'll follow up with Nancy. Yes.
Thanks, Afa. So, starting sort of horizontally, it's really important, I think, that we keep that whole of government approach, and so, that's why David and I have been supporting the work that Effa and Michael have been doing, and with the interdepartmental working group, and we think that's a really important aspect of it to keep the profile of it, show show our teams that that this is important, that it's embedded across government. From an NRCAM perspective, we're also driving it through our internal governance. So our senior management committee, our ADM Science and Tech committee, the DG committee on down, inclusive science working group, those sorts of things. Also, we want to make sure. I mentioned earlier, I think a lot of times our science teams want to work in an inclusive way, but they don't necessarily know how. They may know pieces of how, but not all of those pieces and pulling them together. So, we need to take these guidelines, we need to promote them, we need to make sure that everyone's aware of them and that they can access them and use them. And I'll just say one more thing, from a Canadian Forest Service perspective, which is the organization that I'm responsible for, every year we have a call for proposals from our for our scientists, and so we ask them to provide their proposals, and then those are reviewed by a committee, and the funding is allocated, and we have embedded inclusion principles in that common call for proposals, and so the teams know that they need to embed these principles right at the design phase and demonstrate how they're going to implement them in practice and how they're going to disseminate the results of their research in an inclusive way. How they're going to work in an ethical way with Indigenous groups from a research perspective. All those things need to be incorporated into their proposals, and that's another way where we're sort of institutionalizing the guidelines and the principles and driving it into the work that we do every day.
Thank you, Glenn. So Nancy, please.
Thanks. I would take a page from your tree, David, and I would say this is taking the lens of the full life cycle of that tree, starting with the seed, but taking that as the trajectory of this journey. Really, it starts with the seed, but over time it develops very deep roots. It is a giant in our organization. It's part of our ecosystem. And in some ways it happens very quietly, but it's fed by the very strong voices of each and every person in this room and throughout our organizations. It starts from the moment that you begin within the federal public service, from the moment you become a public servant, you come in with a certain perspective and lens in terms of what your aspirations are for inclusion in our science. And so to be able to make sure that we continue to drive towards that vision to ultimately achieve that giant of a tree that is much more effective science informing decision making within the federal public service, but also for people across the country. I would say it begins with data and applying that lens, an inclusive lens to the data that drives ultimately decisions on what our policies are to ensure that they are equitable, but also how we define what impact looks like across the country. Maybe I will leave it at that with inclusive impact.
Beautiful. So please, David.
Okay, thank you very much, Nancy. That's really great. So I think that there are two levels to this. There is the macro view and there's the micro view. So nothing in this world actually changes unless there is the will to change it. So we've planted the seed. It's growing into a seedling right now to soon be a sapling before it becomes a full tree. It's going to go through all the life cycle stages. But there has to be the will to drive this change. Culture doesn't change by itself. People have to change it. And so this is going to be a different way by which we do science throughout the public service. And there has to be the will. So how sure am I that there is the will? First of all, starting from the Deputy Minister community, and we have a Deputy Minister here with us today who is here despite the fact that she could have been somewhere else. That is commitment, my friends. That is commitment that we are going somewhere with this. We have the Deputy Minister champion. We have the Deputy Minister for racialized communities. She is strongly supportive of this. We have gone to the Deputy Minister Committee on Science and Technology and presented this work. They've been engaged with this work for more than a year. When we did the national dialogue that Ifa talked about, they were there. They endorsed this work as a way of moving forward. So we have the commitment from the highest level of the public service saying, we agree with this work. So that's one. Then there are the Assistant Deputy Ministers for Science and Technology who have also been very engaged with this and committed to it, of which Glenn and I are a part of. We also agree and support this work. So I think that also gives me confidence. When we get down into the various departments and agencies, the question is, what are we going to do about it, right? And I think that is where the rubber hits the road as to how we implement this. And given the commitment of the higher levels, the ADMs are the ones that will drive this change within their various organizations. And so there could be different measures that you put in place to institutionalize exactly how the inclusive science is being done. We know NSEC and the other Tri-Council, they already have these principles embedded in their processes for funding. Again, that gives me a lot of confidence that we are going to be able to maintain this going forward. And so it is going to be incumbent on every department and agency to do that. And recall that the guidelines that we have produced are actually guidelines. That's why they're called guidelines, because it then means that every department and agency has to develop action plans within their own organizations to now move forward with this. And we have designed as part of the system, there's going to be metrics for measuring progress. So there's going to be annual reporting. And we are even going to have some awards for those departments and agencies that have actually excelled in how they are implementing the guidelines. To be an annual event, there will be a national dialogue every year to celebrate this. So it's not just going to die on a shelf somewhere, but we have people that are working day and night to ensure that this becomes part of the culture and this becomes how we work going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. So, okay. Thank you so much, Nancy. So thank you for, so we will welcome Tim now and say, please let's give Nancy a round of applause and Tim now. Thank you so much. So that brings us to a more, I will let you sit down first. Thank you. Timina has been pulling all the strings behind the scene as well, and I'm happy you are here today. Thank you. Okay, so I'm not introducing Timina because Nancy has already done that. So, all right. We will move on to a more interactive session, and in this case, so Brenda and Glenn will have the same question, and David and Timna, you have the same question. And here, Brenda and Glenn, so how do the guidelines in this case, how do they align with Canada's broader objective on, our commitment to reconciliation? And when it comes to inclusive governance, how does the guideline align to this? Yes, please. So Brenda, you can start this time.
Sounds good. I think because the guidelines were developed at a time when there are quite a number of shifts happening in the broader discourse, they're really well aligned with the broader, I would say, Government of Canada commitments that still hold. And they're also specific for the science community. So they feed in to that broader context, and then at a micro level, they really speak to the more local context. And there's quite a number of frameworks. I won't bore you with the specifics in terms of the different kind of instruments that exist. But just to mention a couple that I think are really key, but that really shape how we should work. We've got the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and within that, there's that importance of recognizing that distinct relationship that we have with Indigenous peoples and as a sovereign, and acknowledging Indigenous peoples as sovereign nations with rights to self-determination and governance. And so when we talk about inclusive science, the traditional science enterprise hasn't always been inclusive, has not always, in fact, it's probably always excluded, not acknowledged, the different ways of knowing. And so the guidelines really weave and acknowledge that there are different ways of knowledge without putting them in a hierarchy, and then thinking about how to meaningfully braid in those ways of knowledge into what we consider traditional science or empirical science. Beyond UNDRIP, there is also the 94 calls to action of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And then there's the Canada's anti-racism strategy that was released late 2024, and that covers 24 to 28, and really positions where Canada needs to be, both from an inclusion perspective, but also from an excellence perspective. If I can speak a bit more specifically to the call to action, for folks who are in the federal government, we've heard a lot about it, and for folks who are not in the federal government, maybe just giving a bit of a limelight to it. The Honorable late Ian Shugart, who was the clerk of the Privy Council, in 2021 issued the call to action on anti-racism, equity, and inclusion. And this was more of a moral call to his leader colleagues to say, we've been skirting around issues around racism, equity, and inclusion, and it's time for action. There's things that we need to do. And as Effa said, as David said, without intentionality, nothing happens. And without that leadership to really drive change, nothing happens. The clerk who followed Ian Shugart was Janice Charette, and she made a strong business case for the implementation of the call to action. And within that business case, it's the importance of measuring, the importance of results. If whatever doesn't get measured, doesn't get done. And so that really created a framework for departments to make those moral goals that are aspirational into very concrete, tangible things that we're measuring and counting and following through. And then the clerk who followed that, fortunately for us, was also the former DM of Natural Resources Canada, John Hannaford, who really centered values, and he championed the renewed conversation on values and ethics. And that thread, I think, continues with our current Prime Minister, with our current Clerk Sabia, in terms of the importance of us driving a values-based culture. And to that, our current clerk is really about results. And I think that's where these guidelines become real, because a lot of the time, if we're developing these documents, they're sitting on a shelf somewhere, they are not real. And what's really neat about the guidelines as they are is that there's measurement involved. To Glenn's point, a lot of the time, people's hearts and minds are in the right place, but they don't know where to start. And so the guidelines make it very pragmatic for departments, for leaders, for researchers, for their counterparts to know exactly what to do and how to do it, how to measure the progress, and then track that progress. And I think that's really where it fits into that broader enterprise of driving excellence, driving results, and that ties into the competitiveness, which I think is going to become increasingly important in the coming months and in the coming years. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you so much. And so we will turn to Glenn. And I mean, Glenn is my ADM. I mean, knowing him in CFS, he's very committed to idea, reconciliation. But so when you look at these guidelines, how do you see it actually helping us to meet the broader goal of Canada to reconciliation and inclusive governance?
Yeah, thanks, Afa. I think I'll I'll sort of drill down a little bit in terms of a couple themes that Brenda and David have laid out. You know, Brenda talked about results, and David talked about how action is required, and it's people that need to do the work to institute culture change. And maybe I'll just put it a little bit differently and maybe a little bit more crassly, but and Brenda's heard me say this; she probably knows what I'm going to say. But you know, to me, talk without action on these things is pageantry, and I really don't like pageantry. So, you know, in terms of like how we actually do these things, I think you know, talking about how these guidelines can help turn reconciliation into action in a scientific context. You know, a few things. One, there is an actual pillar in the guidelines that's about how do we work ethically with Indigenous groups in a scientific context, and that's really important. So, you know, making sure that when research is conducted on Indigenous traditional lands, that that's co-developed with Indigenous groups, and that we're recognizing data sovereignty, and that we're you know, making sure that the research that we're doing with Indigenous groups is meeting their objectives and their needs and their interests, and those sorts of things. So that we're not sort of doing transactional consultations with Indigenous groups. We're actually building relationships, and we're working in true partnership. And so, you know, at NRCan, we've taken some steps to try and sort of implement these things. So we've developed a policy on ethical research with Indigenous groups. How we, as Brenda alluded to, how we weave traditional Indigenous knowledge with the science that we're doing, and integrating those things, and really recognizing the value and drawing on that deep knowledge, and you know, we've also developed a curriculum for our science teams so that again, like, you know, I've personally heard from scientists when and it wasn't, you know, it was just in an open kind of town hall sort of forum. It wasn't focused on inclusive science or on, you know, working with Indigenous groups or anything else, but I was asked by scientists how I want to do better work. I want to work in an ethical way with Indigenous groups. How can I do that? Where can I get information on that? And so the department has developed some of those tools to help scientists to do that. And, you know, I'm sure all of us can talk about research that our teams do with Indigenous groups, and how we're working to do that in a more ethical way. And I think that's one of the tangible ways that we can really, one of many tangible ways that we can actually turn reconciliation into action in a meaningful way.
Thank you, Glenn. And turn reconciliation into action in a meaningful way, and then so on. Along the same line, I will go to David, and here I want to turning reconciliation into meaningful action, borrowing from Glenn's ending. How our department building the capacity, like including things like developing sustained consultation and engagement strategies, updating policies to be able to include Indigenous knowledge system alongside Western paradigm way of thinking, and in the area of environmental monitoring, like safety, public health, food, and security. So I would want you to have your perspective on that, please.
Okay, so thank you very much for this. I think it is really important to ensure that we are integrating Indigenous knowledge into all we do. And I would say that as a background, when you think about Indigenous knowledge, most of when we learn about it, it means they have already been doing experiments on it for the last 3 or 4, 10,000 years. So our experiments would be, we go out there, pick up the product, bring it to the lab, test it, and then within 20 minutes or 2 hours, we'll come up and say, oh, this plant or this product contains this type of chemicals in them. So we should eat or shouldn't eat it because it's dangerous for us. Indigenous people already know that without going to a lab. I grew up in Ghana, and that's exactly how we learned about things. I could go with you into the forest, and I could tell you what plant you can eat and what you cannot eat, because people have eaten them and died, and others have not. I still remember when we were growing up, anytime you got malaria, they would go and take the neem leaves, they would boil it, and you drink it. Okay? Anybody who wants can try the neem leaves. Well, you can find it in Canada, but you can still get some neem products. And then they will probably bring you quinine, and then you take the medicine, and it tastes exactly like the neem tree. Then you say, which one did they really give me? Is it the neem tree or this is quinine? But what does it actually mean? It actually means that because of thousand years of knowledge, they have been able to extract from the neem tree to make quinine, which is then what basically becomes the medicine. And so my point is that there is different ways of knowing something. And the way we do it in the federal science is one way. And the other ways exist. And we should not discount the other ways just because it hasn't gone through a specified scientific method and published in a high-impact journal. That's the main point that I really wanted to make that. And so you need to respect that. If you work with indigenous communities, you will hear a lot about their knowledge. You walk with them to the land, and they'll start telling you that if I see this, I know this is going to happen. Even the weather, a whole lot of knowledge that we don't even know about. And so it is really, really important that when we start to do science, we work with indigenous communities, even in defining what the question is. What is the science question that we are trying to, rather than bringing the solution and say, okay, if we did this, this would help, right? It is more about what is the science question? What are we trying to do? What are we trying to achieve? And so we work with indigenous communities, and I know every department and agency is different in terms of their mandates. And so for us, some of the work that we do with them is about testing for biotoxins in different spaces to see whether harvesting could continue or not. Like it's to make sure that the fish and whatever seafood they're harvesting is all good and there's no, toxins in them. So we do that. We have different ways of working with them in determining where should we sample, which places are really relevant for you, which ones are more important, how do you prioritize the work. And I think that's how it should be. It shouldn't be us deciding that, oh, we want to sample this lake or this water body versus another one, right? And when you actually institutionalize something like that, and we have put in some training programs at the CFIA, which is actually mandatory, so there's a whole path of learning about indigenous traditions, cultures, and how that is relates to science. And the broader, it goes beyond science, for sure. But all of that is to ensure that we even have the competencies within our own organization. And we have an indigenous science office at the CFIA that we created, and this has become a center of excellence for advice. People come to them for all kinds of questions, and it goes back to some of what my esteemed colleagues had mentioned. People want to do the right thing, but they don't know how. And if you don't create that capacity within your organization to be able to provide the guidance, then you are not helping to move things forward. Right. So it's not just about educating people, but it's also about ensuring that when people have questions, there is a place they can go and have timely answers to the questions that they have. And that allows the work to continue without being hindered. So I would say that it is really important in terms of reconciliation. And reconciliation is a very broad term. But I would say, from a science perspective, just the ability to work with them and not take indigenous knowledge as an afterthought actually improves our credibility. And just to give the other example I had was that so when I first came to Canada, I didn't actually know that kids were allergic to peanuts, right? And so many years after I've been here, and I only settled in Canada 2 years ago, if you believe that. But then I actually heard about a study that said that, they have just spent, I don't know how many millions of dollars was spent in doing the study, but they did say, well, if you expose the kids to peanuts at a young age, they are less likely to be allergic in the future. And I said, they could have just asked me. They didn't need to spend $2 million to figure out. If they had asked me, I would have told them that. Because when we are growing up in my country, a kid, even by the time you're 6 months old and you begin to get your first tooth coming out, they're already putting peanuts into your mouth and making sure that you can chew on it and bite on it and all that. And I never heard of any kids being allergic to peanuts. I'm not saying it doesn't exist. I'm saying that the majority, over 90% will not be allergic. But then they spent millions of dollars to tell us that what we already knew for a very long time. So I even think that from, as a part-time economist, from an economic perspective, there is even efficiency in actually getting knowledge for free in places where we are still actually spending money to find out. Anyway, I'm going to stop there.
Thank you, David. Let's put our hands together for our panelists, please. Okay. So I know at this stage your appetite is whet to want to join the discussion, but just give us the last round of the focus discussion, and we will soon come to you to get your questions. So we want to welcome you, Timna, with a question, and thank you for stepping in for Nancy. So, looking ahead, and this, I want us to look at success. How do we define success? How does success look like? So in the next 5, 10, 15 years, what does success look like to you, and how do you see these guidelines we have today, helping to shape science policy in Canada in the future?
All right. Hello, everyone. I'm very happy to be here, and I think I'll be able to offer a bit of a different experience, maybe from a more on-the-ground implementation, but also how you put the words to action. So I'm the director of the Health Equity Division at the Public Health Agency, and I was asked by Nancy to come here and speak to you about some of our experiences implementing and advancing this work. I am responsible for anti-racism in science, the sex and gender-based analysis work that Nancy talked about, as well as implementing and advancing intersectionality. In the public health context, it's been really, really important to ensure that we continue to maintain trust across not only our organization, but with our stakeholders, with our Indigenous partners, with a vast number of different communities across Canada. And we learned that through COVID. We learned it a really, really hard way. We have a lot of really good collaborative relationships across the government. I really think that this initiative to build inclusive science guidelines that cut across all departments and agencies that do science is a fantastic way to start this dialogue, because it enables us to have that vision that cuts across government. It's not specific to one department, but it allows each department to then look at our own context and implement it and move it forward. So for me, the question, Effa, around what's the vision, how do we advance this work, it goes back to a point Nancy made around these being foundational aspects of our work. Building trust, building capacity with our employees. So for the agency, this has meant building on training, capacity, awareness, building tools and resources that help employees understand and situate how important this work is in the day-to-day implementation of science that they're doing, but also embedding it in various practices and various policies that we have. So for example, the agency launched a science strategy. At the core of that science strategy is the point that multiple ways of knowing and including, in particular, Indigenous and Afrocentric knowledge systems is really, really a core value to the way that we do science. And that affirms our commitment to open and collaborative models of science, including how we learn from First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. So that touches a little bit, David, on what you were talking about as well. And the strategy outlines ways to do that. We look at how the inclusive science guidelines will help to complement some of the strategies and policy work that we have within the agency, and then how we engage our staff to be able to fully implement this as we move forward. And I think it comes back down to some of the values and ethics that you were talking about too, Brenda, with the renewal of a really core set of values and ethics for the public service, ensuring that we are culturally humble and that the staff are equipped to understand what that means and how they contribute has been a really important part of our work. We've got specific tools at the Public Health Agency, and I'm happy to speak about them further, but for example, we launched an Indigenous Cultural Competency Learning Policy and Roadmap. And again, it's something that's very tangible and concrete that allows staff to do a bit of a self-assessment on where they're at in their own journey and use that suite of tools to help them advance their knowledge and implement that into the work that they're doing. We equally have an anti-racism and science strategy. We work collaboratively with colleagues at Health Canada who also have an anti-racism and science strategy to make sure that we're taking a portfolio approach and that we are, again, embedding this work across our organization. So just in terms of where we go from here, my vision as someone who sits more on the policy side of the house is that we're taking this information, we're taking the guidance, we're embedding it in our work, and we're equipping our staff and our stakeholders and the people that we're working with, and that's many of you who are in the room today, to be able to do this collaboratively and together and to set that foundation.
Thank you so much. And so we'll go to Glenn, and it's still on the same, like the next 5, 10, 15 years, how does success look like to you, and how do you see this shaping the future of science policy in Canada?
Yeah, so I think for me, success looks like this just being the way that we work. And so it's just a given that when people are designing research projects, that they're designing them in an inclusive way, that when they're working with Indigenous groups, they're co-developing the research with those groups, and that, you know, when they're practicing their science, they're doing it in inclusive teams, and so those diverse perspectives are brought to bear. When they're disseminating, they're doing that knowledge exchange and the dissemination of the knowledge that's created. That's done in a way that is accessible and done in a way that different communities can access it easily, and that we're reporting on these things in a comprehensive way. And excuse me. I think so basically having that embedded in the way that we work going forward, I think that's what that's part of what success looks like to me. And then, you know, to sort of build on a concept that every other person up here has talked about, it's about better results for Canadians too. And so success looks like, the work that we're doing in an inclusive way actually yields better scientific results, and therefore yields more robust a more robust evidence base for policy that is, that better serves the diverse society that we live in.
Thank you so much. So we will turn to David and Brenda quickly, and in the next 6 minutes, we'll come back to you with the Q&A. So here we want to look at there is a need for accountability, and in fact, let's put it this way, as the clerk says, consequential accountability in this whole work. And so with the guidelines that we have, how do we evaluate our progress and ensure that there is that consequential accountability? Because without accountability, most of these initiatives, they come to naught. So how do we ensure that there is that accountability, and also how does the scientists like myself as policymakers, how do we, make inclusion and equity as a measurable outcome of the work that we do? Yeah, so we will tend to. So Brenda, you can start, and then David will follow, and then we'll come to you for the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you. I really like kind of the foundation that Len just laid now, which is embedding. For a long time, when we do what we consider our EDI work, it's a standalone, it's an action plan. And I'm saying this as I prepare to develop an action plan for Treasury Board and do this work. But I think the first step is really weaving it into the DNA of just how we do great science, and really making it a part of, and this is where I think the values conversation really becomes important. It's not just what we do, it's who we are. And I think as Canadians, we embody a lot of key values that distinguish us even from our neighbors south of the border. And so taking that with pride and then living it out, living those values into the type of research and development that we do as a country, and really pushing that forward. That being said, I think that's kind of like the aspirational. I'm a serial optimist, so I think one of the stickers at the NRC table says the glass is actually full because there's, other things in there. But what gets measured gets done. And especially from a government perspective, if no one's tracking it, if no one's measuring it, it's going to fall to the sidelines. So really thinking about that rigorous performance measurement, data is so key. We don't disaggregate by default. It's really unfortunate that the data battle is the very basic, just the evidence base. So us getting to a point where we have disaggregated data by default, where we have the evidence base built into how we work is really, really key. And then the other part of it is the breakdown of the silos. We're really good at silos. Like, I think we are so good at compartmentalizing things from a federal government perspective, and within departments, the person who sits right next to you, have no idea what they're working on. So really rethinking how we collaborate, especially in this context of being efficient and not duplicating our efforts. So really leveraging those research collaborations, interdepartmental collaboration. And I think that's where what you've achieved with the 17 departments coming together is that best practices sharing. I struggled with this, you figured it out. Let's use some of those lessons learned in very tangible and pragmatic ways. And I think at the end of the day, really acknowledging that when our science is diverse and inclusive, it benefits all, not just a few. And so when we come at it from that perspective, then our researchers should look like the Canadians that they're researching. Our research grant recipients should look like the Canadians that they're serving. And when we are intentional about that through data to track those numbers, then we really get to that point where we're really driving the real research excellence, because excellence can only be achieved when we bring all the voices, and those voices have a lot of key contributions, and when they're not included, we're missing out, and we're actually harming parts of our population. So that shift in terms of how we work and then living that out is really, really key.
Thank you so much. And so David, please.
So I'm really glad that my colleagues went first. They have pretty much covered all aspects of how accountability can be built into this. A few other thoughts. So if I pick on Brenda's point about how we are good at working in silos and segregating things, I think if we see this as something that is one piece of us, and then that becomes a problem in terms of how we implement it. We have to see it as the culture and the way of working. So I agree with Glenn. I can't add anything to that. It has to be the way we work. And once it becomes the way we work, it is really easy to measure and to see the impact on the better public policies that come out of the science that is being done. Because at the end of the day, that is the bottom line. The bottom line is, are Canadians getting better value for the science that is being done within the organization, within the federal government? And that, if we can't get to that point, all the other work, though good, is not really still meeting the mark in terms of where we need to be. So I would say that, you can force a donkey to the river, but you cannot force it to drink water. So when we talk about consequential accountability, what are we really going to do about it? Are we going to, have a cane all the time and saying, you did not do this, thou shalt do this, thou shalt do that? I don't think that's how you get cultural change. I think the flip side of it, from an economics view, is what is the incentive for people to behave differently? What is the incentive for us to institutionalize this type of science, how we do science in the federal government? And I think that will be the draw, would be when everybody can feel and is convinced that that is the right way to do things. I think you don't need the stick. You just have the carrot, and then everybody follows it. So I would say that that's why the word embedding is really important. Until we can embed it, we will not be successful. If we keep thinking it's a siloed thing, so that in the PMA, they say, okay, David, thou shall ensure that your science is inclusive, I don't think that is going to go very far, right? It has to be part of the broader way in which we do things in the whole public service. And that is where cultural change becomes the key point.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. So I think now we know what the SBDs, the science-based departments and agencies have done. And now you have a very good idea of where we want to go, and you know what success means to us. You know how we want to ensure consequential accountability. Science in Canada is not just excellent, but it has to be trusted, it has to be relevant, and it has to belong to everyone. So we will now welcome our audience. But before I would do that, I want to acknowledge that there is another gentleman. His name is Michael Reed. Michael is the national lead, and he's a co-chair with me on this particular working group. And I also want to recognize, sorry, I'm taking my glasses. We have some of our working group members here, like Matthew Hu and then Apondi. And I want them, if you are here, please rise up on your feet. We want to give you a big round of applause for all the amazing work you are. So, Matt, thank you. Yeah, so thank you so much. Even yesterday, when Matthew was here, we had a working group session. He had to join. Apondi had to join. Yeah, they are very dedicated. Thank you so much. So now, please, we want to have the poll, the online poll on the QR code online here, so that you can scan if you want to take part of the survey. And I will encourage all of you to do that. We will get your feedback through that. And then feel free to come forward, approach the microphone. Oh, beautiful. Give us your name, if you don't mind, where you are coming from, and then please address your question to the audience.
Sure, thank you very much. My name is Ella Bowles, and I live in Ottawa. I work for Environment and Climate Change Canada. I'm a biologist. So thank you very much for this panel, really insightful, and learning about that strategy. I'd sort of vaguely heard about it, but it's very useful, and I'll spend some time looking into it. So I'm curious, the strategy is about equity, diversity, and inclusion, and from what I hear, it is focused on racial diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm wondering if there's a component of it that deals with disability. I'm visually impaired, and my experience in my government journey hasn't been easy, and many of my colleagues who have similar or different challenges would say the same. The government has a line of access and conveys that they have very good equity, diversity and inclusion strategies with respect to disability, but there's very fundamental things that they don't meet. And so, yeah, sorry, that was a very long, drawn-out question. But my question is disability a component of that strategy? If not, is there a desire for it to become a component of that strategy, or is it a separate strategy altogether that we work towards an interdepartmental strategy for that as well? Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I think I'll turn to Glenn, and I'm doing this, I'm not being biased, but in his role as the champion for accessibility. But to answer to touch on your question, yes, so you may notice that I use the word idea. So that is inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility. So we have accessibility as a key component of this, but I would want to turn to Glenn. Yeah. And if any of our panelists want to come in.
Sure. Yeah, it's a really great point. Excuse me. And yeah, it is key that we look at accessibility issues as well. I think when we're thinking about how we design research and how we practice research and how we disseminate research, it has to be done in a way that's accessible to people with diverse abilities. When we look at, often when we talk about accessibility in the workplace, we're thinking in the government context, we're thinking about cubicles, right? And it's actually even more challenging when you go into a lab setting, right? And how do you make sure that in our labs and in our scientific teams that we are creating an environment that allows everyone to contribute to their fullest, and so that's a really key aspect. And we are doing some work across science-based departments around accessible labs, and I'd encourage you to. If you're not engaged in that, EFA can direct you to folks who are working on that. But yeah, it's a really important point that you raise, and that is part of making sure that we are that we're creating an environment where everyone is supported to contribute to their fullest.
Thank you. I will look into that, because I spent my life working in labs. I now work in a cubicle and still experience very significant barriers to accessing what I need to be able to work effectively in an office environment. But I'll definitely look at the strategy, and thank you for expanding that the strategy does also include disability. Thank you.
Yes, and I also want to mention there is a gentleman here. He's also been very influential or crucial for this work. His name is Matthew Bergeron. Matthew is the lead for the working group. Matthew, can you please be on your feet for us to yeah. Sorry, I put you on the spot. So please, you can reach out to Matthew. He's the lead on the working group. There is a community of practice, and Matthew is doing an amazing job on that. So please reach out to Matthew as well. Okay, so since because of time,
I'll just add a 2-second comment that I think. There's also, we have the Accessible Canada Act, which is legislation around how to make Canada accessible by law. And a lot of the time when we hear about the call to action, it is leadership-led, but there is no legislation that goes along with the call to action, which is why it really started out as a moral call. And a lot of departments are tracking their progress through their respective accessibility plans. And intersectionality becomes extremely important because it's not about accessibility on one hand and racialized groups on the other, but that intersectionality is really key if you are racialized and a person who with a disability. It comes with layers, and so that lens, I think, is reflected in the approach, and it's a great reminder. So it was a really great question, just as to how do we keep interweaving the themes and how are they interconnected. So thank you so much.
Thank you, boss. So that's how I call her, so it's not new, right? All right, so I think since we came here, we want to go the other side. And so what I'm going to do is, in order to have all your questions, I'm going to sacrifice my closing remark so that you will have my closing remark. So keep your question very short, and we may be able to take as many as possible. Please, over to you.
Thank you. So I'm Matt McLeod. I'm here on behalf of the Professional Institute of the Public Service of Canada. So I'm on the group executive, the union executive representing federal researchers across departments. So I'm coming at it from that angle. To that last point, I will say I have colleagues with disabilities who feel committed out, and they would be quite happy for the union to take on those representational roles. So please do involve us, because we also have that interdepartmental role, which that's what I want to talk about is the career progression framework for federal researchers. We have been trying as a union to engage with management on the equity part of that and have not heard a lot back. You are not faces I have seen at those meetings, so I would encourage you to reach out to your colleagues who are on bargaining teams and consultation teams, because we have ideas and contributions there too. Data is huge. We are told the equity data is not collected on the researcher promotion process, so we don't know what we don't know, and that's one of the big things we've been pushing on the last couple of years. In D&D, we were able to get data not on that, but on people who had taken parental leave or sick leave, and we did see in the data there were career impacts, and we suspect there's other barriers in there as well. So that's a general plea. Please engage with your union reps. My more specific question is on the US. So I've had members come to me who have been self-selecting out of travel, whether because of their gender identity, their country of origin, or even the type of research they do, like social scientists who are like experts on gender in the military, or like, I'm gonna get Googled by the border officer, I'm not gonna go. Management's response to this has been, well, we support people to not go, but we're like, well, what about the knock-on career impacts of missing those meetings, missing those connections? And we have not got a good answer back on that. So I'm just curious from your perspective, how do we support people who make that choice to not go to the US, but then suffer career consequences as a result?
So this is a free-range question. Please.
Well, thank you very much. I know there's not a perfect solution to it, but what I would say would be substitution of other opportunities that are not to the US would be one way to support those individuals. So for example, I have research scientists, but if a scientist came to me in a real life situation like that, I would say, okay, that conference to the US, maybe you've chosen not to go for these valid reasons. However, maybe there is a conference either next year or this year in Sweden or Finland, which you could go. Will it cost a bit more? Yes, but in the context of accommodating the circumstances, I would make that decision to say go to an alternate conference so that you really don't lose out on anything. So I'll keep it short just because we are between you and lunch. So.
All right. So we keeping the responses to one. I know the other panelists will have perspective on this, but so that we can have all your questions. So please, over to you.
Thank you very much. This has been a really great talk. I'm Ray Monsbach. I'm actually a physics professor at Concordia University. And so this is probably going to be a really weird question from a physics professor. But we've talked a lot about measurements as a means for accountability. And of course, I think that data is really important. And measurement is really important. But I also think a lot about how you know, the old truism, you excel at what you measure. So how do we make sure that we're not measuring away the immeasurables? Like, if you're measuring the numbers, say, for example, you measure, okay, we got 50% of women in the room, but they're not talking. You know, how do you ensure that you're managing to not over-focus on the measurements, I guess?
So thank you so much. And before I turn to our panelists, in the guidelines, we have a reporting matrix. And so the reporting matrix, the way it works is that all the departments and agencies, every year, there are 7 stakeholders: the deputy minister, deputy heads, HR, communication, chief scientists. So all the stakeholders have assigned tasks and how they're going to meet them. And in this reporting matrix, what we try to avoid exactly what you ask. We notice that numbers don't actually tell lived experience sometimes. So the indicators we provided in the reporting matrix, we make sure that they are quantitative and qualitative. And also, so indicators are in such a way that they are able to bring the lived experience of people, our employees, and also be able to tell us what the numbers are. So, but I want to turn to our panelists if there is something to be added.
Yeah, maybe I can field that a little bit from a programmatic and policy perspective. You're absolutely right, Effa. From a measurement perspective, we want to make sure that we're engaging with people with lived experience, and that's not only our employees within our departments, but also with our stakeholders and with people outside of the department. At the Public Health Agency, we're seeing enhanced collaboration, not only with communities at the regional and local level, but also with some of the national organizations who themselves are reaching out and ensuring that you have really good collaboration across communities. So it's a really great question. I think sometimes we become really focused on the data. We advocate for disaggregated data. We need more information in order to serve our populations better, but you need to do that in collaboration with others who also understand their populations, and also by disaggregating and looking at it from a lived experience perspective.
And I think you're getting at the culture question, right? Because the data is not going to change the culture. Exactly. And if we're just resistant to change, well, we're resistant to change. That being said, I think in a lot of organizations, you can't even start the culture shift without acknowledging that there's a need for a shift. And the data helps dispel that, because in a lot of the times we're still skirting around the issue. Are we really sure? Is it really? But when you start to look at your representation data and it just tells you starkly, well, who's getting promoted? To our colleague from the union's point, who is getting opportunities to go internationally? Who is getting to advance their careers? Then it's no longer we're no longer skirting around it, and then we start to get into the concrete actions. So I think of it a bit as a continuum, and maybe even just the starting point. But in a lot of departments, we're not even starting the conversation because we're still acting like it's not an issue and it's not a problem. But thank you for the question.
Thank you. So please.
I'll try to be really brief. My name's Kyla Reed. I'm from Carleton University. I was interested in hearing some of the panelists comment on, especially the knowledge dissemination, mobilization, community engagement piece of this, specifically as a way to potentially combat misinformation, disinformation, and the growing distrust of science in our society.
So that's another free range question.
Well, I think one way to combat misinformation and disinformation and mistrust is to ensure that that people in society see themselves in the research that's being done and have access to the results of that research in forms that are sort of tailored to the audience. And so I think if we do a good job of this, it's not going to erase misinformation, mistrust, disinformation, but I think it contributes to a response to that will, hopefully help to increase trust in the science and the advice that comes from that science within society, as people kind of see themselves more reflected in that process and in those deliverables and results.
Awesome.
Yeah, so if I may just add more briefly to that, within the CFIA, we do annual polling of Canadians to know how much trust they put in the CFIA. And it's very high. And it is actually, when you break down the data, it is because of the science. They trust the science, a large by far in terms of the trust. And so when people trust your science, then they are less likely to believe the misinformation because they would say, this is a trusted organization. So when we say put out a food recall, people take it seriously because they trust the science that, before we say that, it means we have evidence that there is a problem with that product that we are recalling. And without that trust, it simply means that it will be very difficult for us to continue to execute our mandate as an agency that is responsible for food safety, animal health, and plant health. So we are very conscious about that. And if we see the trust of Canadians falling in terms of the science that we do, then we will have to take action about that. But we keep a tab on knowing what the trust level is. And the last one showed that actually the trust has gone up again. So if you take, it's usually in the 90% about the trust in our science. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I think at this stage, I would invite you to do the loudest of all. Let's give them a big round of applause. I was expecting this to be the best. Let's do it better, a little better. Thank you so much. So I really like this particular discussion, given that we are engaged, and I'm sure you participated in the poll as well. So just a quick announcement. The guideline is evergreen. Evergreen meaning that every year our ADM champions, they've managed to get us to a point where the Deputy Minister of Science and Technology communities and all the SBDAs have accepted to come together every year to have national dialogue on inclusive science. And after the national dialogue, we review the guidelines, modify it, improve on it. We learn from our own practices. So if you are in the government, you will soon hear of this. And if you are not in the government, please look out for the guidelines. They will soon come your way. I want to say a big thank you to all of you. You can see that I'm losing my voice. It means that I came with a voice only for 1.5 hours. And because the time is up, the voice is going, don't mind me. So look out for the guidelines. And we are very grateful to all the Deputy Minister, Assistant Deputy Minister of Science and Technology. I didn't mention Caroline Xavier, the Deputy Minister for Racialized Employees. She has been very supportive as well. So as our audience and our panelists leave the stage, I would want you to give them a big round of applause. And I want to say thank you to Glenn and David, Brenda, and Timna for all your support. Have an amazing rest of the day and enjoy your lunch. Thank you.